Hi, everyone. This is Karen with the Rugger's Edge. I am so excited to do another installment of these webinar interviews with awesome people in our rugby community. I'm really excited today to have Coach Becky Carlson, head coach of Quinnipiac. She's been there for 8 years, and she knows everything. If you have questions about what's going on with NCAA rugby, I immediately reach out to Becky. So I thought, who better to have kind of a little Q&A here, especially with, recently, like I just did a session out in Northern California and half the room were females. And that was great because I think in the years I've been doing these presentations, most of the time there's, maybe one or two, female athletes in the room. So to really see a group of eager young athletes that want to move ahead. I don't know. It's great to see the growth. So I'll just kind of throw it over to you. I had a couple questions here just to kind of start us off. So we'll kind of just jump in. I think one of the things that always comes up, because I know we've had these conversations, is if there was one or two things you wish parents knew about the recruiting process, specifically about women's rugby, right? College women's rugby is different from other sports. What are the one or two things you wish, that they knew about it?
Thanks for having me on, Karen. I think that, one, this is a fantastic opportunity to have that dialogue, because this is actually one of the top questions that I get constantly from the parents. And they'll come into my office and they'll say, well, I don't understand. We didn't have to do this at this other school, and we did have to do this at this other school. And it's just these, and very well, because this is your business. This is your professional life. And these are the questions you get. But I think I would start with, I hope that parents, my wish for them is for them to continue to be curious about the process of recruiting without having to succumb to the temptation to overtake it. And I think that is a huge challenge now. And as coaches, we tend to see more parents now wanting to run the process for their child. And while it's good to be enthusiastic and it's exciting, it's another way that I think sometimes parents accidentally tend to subtract from the opportunity that is the recruiting process. And I want parents to really think about, in the NCAA capacity, the recruiting process is a warm-up to college for your child, where they're going to need to be filling out their paperwork. They're going to memorize their own social security number. They're going to be registering for their own classes and setting up meetings with professors and counselors. So it's not necessarily just about the process of them being recruited as an athlete. It's really this kind of dress rehearsal for the independence that they're going to have when they go to college. And you want to be a part of that, yes, but you also want to allow them sometimes to fail in this process, because sometimes we need them to show us what it is that they want as college coaches. And a lot of times athletes will show me what they don't want by what they don't do. So it is one of those things where because they're going to be in charge of their own schedule and their sports and their academics, if you're overly excited and take over that process because maybe you don't trust your child enough to get those things done, or it's just how it's always been done, then we're really doing them a disservice. And it's not because everyone loves their child and they want the best for them. But I think that that a lot of that anxiety comes from not understanding the differences. And I'm going to outline a couple of those differences, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So basically, if you were to go back and look at any of our other sports that are currently available at the college NCAA level, whether it's soccer, softball, basketball, lacrosse, prior to 2002, when rugby became an emerging sport, those opportunities, scholarship-wise, were not available. They were available at the club level. And there is a massive amount of club level administrative opportunities, but it's not quite the same. And so outlining those is, there's an NCAA eligibility center, and I'm sure that you can tell your clients all about the NCAA eligibility center. And it tends to, I think, not stress people out, but it tends to give them kind of this impression that it's so much more work when it's really not. And I want people to think of the NCAA Eligibility Center as something that is a checks and balances for your academic eligibility, for your time clock in college of how long that you can play that sport, and something that is an extra safety net that keeps track of your graduation time. And if you have enough credits by the time you're a freshman, sophomore, and junior and senior, that they keep you on track. So you're not just there to get a degree and play a sport, you're there specifically to get a degree, and the sport is the bonus, right? So that's kind of how we look at it. And the not just the eligibility center, but the process in itself and the contact with coaches. People will often say to me, well, it sometimes, we just don't understand, why can't we contact this coach, and why can't that coach contact us, and what's a dead period, and what's an evaluation period? And it's a little bit frustrating, but I want people to think about the NCAA and the NIRA opportunities in the context of those provisions and bylaws being put there for the safety, eligibility, liability, and ethical practices of the coaches that they're dealing with. So what it means is that there are those special protections that are embedded inside of my job as a college coach and the other NIRA coaches, that says that if they're in the middle of a tournament, a NIRA coach is not just to walk up in the middle of a tournament and start speaking to an athlete. They need to be respectful of that from not only an ethical standpoint, but from a bylaw standpoint that says we do not speak to those athletes until they are dressed and away from the competition. And I think that in itself is just basic ethics, but it is something that's written in stone, because personally for me as a coach, I believe that when that prospect knows that a college coach is actually at their tournament, are their nerves already not coming unglued, that we need to somehow remind them in the middle of the tournament that we're there and we're watching? That's not a time for a college pitch. That's a time for them to be performing at their highest level of focus. So while it may seem like something that makes it appear as if a coach isn't interested because they're not soliciting you at that tournament, or maybe you are not of a recruitable age, that's for the protection of the student athlete. And I don't see too many arguments against protection of the student athlete, because I think that is paramount. And I think that the level of contact, the times of the contact, and the methodology of contact is becoming much more of problematic in all sports, with coaches texting kids without parents knowing that this stuff is happening, coaches having email correspondence and promising things that they just can't deliver on. So I think that the distinction between those two opportunities is paramount, specifically because it's at the forefront now in these national conversations about what we're doing that is in the best interest of the student athlete.
Right. And I like your focus on, because I think sometimes when I talk to parents, or even at this one session, it's a lot of, if you're going to go through these schools, you're jumping through so many more hoops. Why are they making us jump through so many more hoops? Like, we just want to play, college rugby or whatever. And so there's that confusion of, for example, we go to a tournament, like you just said, and they're like, but that coach came up to me and did talk to me, and I was a freshman. So he or she must really like me, and that other coach didn't talk to me, so they must not like me. And so there's this weird disconnect about, ensuring that, that they're talking to them when they're ready. And I mean, there's no point, at least for me, there's no point talking to a coach when you're a freshman, when you don't even have a transcript. You haven't taken, you haven't finished, even a semester's worth of classes. We don't even know if you are college eligible. So I think you're right. I think parents get really, really excited without taking a minute to think about, okay, well, hang on a minute. What is best for our child in this process,
Right. And I think the one thing that I always talk to parents about is asking those specific questions. And it doesn't have anything to do with Quinnipiac particularly. It has to do with, I say to them a lot of times, I go, okay, I'm taking my Quinnipiac hat off. I'm talking to you as an NCAA college coach, because I think I want to help you in this, in understanding what the best fit for you is, because it's not about me. It's not about what I want. It's not about what the program is solely trying to achieve. It's about what is a good fit for you. And I've had some tremendous athletes where I'm like, I don't think this is actually the fit for you, academically. If this is, you never try to make their major fit the institution, and it just doesn't, it's not in the best interest of the student athlete. But I think that brings us to the second thing that I would want parents to understand. And that's, you know, encouraging them to understand the recruiting process and what it actually means to be pursuing that NCAA opportunity. And that can actually help in what you just said in your everyday questions that you get. You know, the institutions of the NCAA that oversee women's rugby, it's a really interesting point right now. And I think that where we're at, where every other pre-championship NCAA sport was before they became a championship sport, and people have a ton of questions because our pool isn't as large. And I think in a lot of ways, we have organizations that have the audience and that are able to get that message out just haven't gotten the right messages in terms of what those two defining opportunities are. And there is an entirely different process for NCAA athletes because, like I said earlier, it takes into account your eligibility, your liability, your safety, your ethical practices. And what you really want to ask, and I think this is important to all parents, and I haven't met a parent that hasn't thought that this was important, when I say, well, listen, you know, how is your school tied to the institution? And what is my status? Am I an athlete? Am I a student athlete that is tied to athletics, which means that so much of my accountability and the things that I do, if I were to need a tutor, who gets me that tutor? If I were to need some support mentally, you know, maybe I need to talk to a counselor, a sports psychologist. Is that attached to athletics? Is that part of it? If I get hurt out on the field, who pays for that? I think those are huge questions when you're talking about, especially a sport like rugby that's full contact. You're talking about a world of those liability questions that need to be answered. And you know, my answer is, listen, there are 20 people that exist in the athletic department where your athlete is a student athlete connected to the athletic department, where their job is solely to see that you succeed. That's their job. They work all day long, you know, pushing papers and speaking to athletes and speaking to other coaches and administrators to make sure that you're successful. And that in itself, I think, is not a replaceable safety net. And it's not to say that other opportunities aren't a good fit that are not NCAA. It's just a different set of opportunities that are available. And I think when you really break it down and talk to parents about it from an insurance standpoint, from a care and concern standpoint, and an ethical treatment level, where there's all these, not only eyes watching the athlete, but there's eyes watching the coach. There's eyes everywhere on campus when you're built into this structure. And that's just something I think isn't replaceable in trying to explain it. And it's at its very core, when I try to explain to people that don't understand how rugby fits into this NCAA box, I ask them if they know anything about NCAA soccer, if they know anything about how someone was recruited in NCAA basketball. They say, well, sure. And I go, it's the same thing. And that just kind of blows people's minds, I think, in a lot of ways. And what's really unique about it is that emerging sports is only for women. And it always has been for the NCAA. You have your previously emerging sports. You had your bowling, your ice hockey, water polo. We have equestrian and triathlon. And emerging sports is where women go first. And that is where it's so foreign to people, because it's usually there's a men's program that exists someplace, and it's like, well, we might as well add the women. And women are going first in this. And so, and that's what happened at Quinnipiac. There was no existing program at all, and they added it. And, you know, now they're talking about, that's actually opened the door to bring on men's club at Quinnipiac. So we're the first in that. So women are actually a lot of that opportunity to go first. So this is really a fascinating time. And, you know, it's a fascinating time for the young women that are taking advantage of the availability of NCAA scholarship and NCAA support and the recruiting process, because realistically, we haven't hit those 40 teams yet. We're at 19 now, 19 or 20 now. We have another announcement coming up shortly, and then another 2 teams. And once we hit that 40, the athletes that are actually in the recruiting pool now are going to be the first to reap the benefits of a full NCAA championship that is played on television, just like soccer, and just like basketball, and just like gymnastics and swimming. And that is something that is incredibly exciting, that I don't think if I talk to a junior or a senior now, that they can possibly grasp what that even means to the future of the game. But when my athletes leave, they know they're like, I'm building this, I'm a part of this. So it's kind of a neat place for our sport to be in. And I think that that part of it is huge, why we're trying to really explain the differences between the two, because every single sport has had that evolution where typically, you know, if you had a soccer used to be recruited out of high school, and then the clubs got really big and they were only going to recruit a club, and high school soccer isn't that much of a pool anymore. We haven't had that evolution where it's kind of like we're a little bit mixed, right? We even have girls high school, singular school, and club programs. So we're still in that kind of interesting category where it makes complete sense that there would be those questions. It's just, I don't know that, I wish that there would be more of those resources available at the higher levels that we're kind of parroting the same information that NIRA is.
Right. I mean, I think one of the things that that you touch on that I think is so important. I mean, I have a, you know, I have a little one now, and like she just started playing soccer, and I'm like, I could only imagine as she, you know, continues into other sports or whatever, you do see you're investing so much time and energy, and you know, like when it gets to this point, so they're in high school and these parents are so eager. It's funny, like the things that they focus on sometimes are really like they get blinded by the, you know, I don't know, the spectacle or names or like the things that they always focus on is like obviously like winning, right? National championships. Like for example, maybe they would overlook a smaller NCAA Division III team because they're like, oh well, they're not very good, and my daughter has to play at the best. And that, I think that's kind of overlooking other, in my mind, will be more important things, right? So like what you talked about, like the major or what is maybe the best fit for the student. But it was really interesting. I did that presentation and I brought up medical because I think that's really important. I said, look, you know, we're playing a contact sport. I said, you know, in the room of the players, that who here has been injured? You know, I mean, pretty much every hand shot up, and there obviously it's a range of, you know, ankle sprains. But one girl was like, I broke my femur, like she broke her leg. She's back, but I mean, that's a big injury, and I think it didn't dawn on them. And I said, look, I really want you to pick a school where if that injury happens and you're out for 6 weeks, a semester, or a year, are you happy at that school, and who's taking care of you while that's happening? Are you paying you know, for all that stuff because you're a club athlete? Like that's different than I think if you get injured as a varsity athlete. Right.
Yes, and that's actually one of the more interesting things. I have this question happen all the time. The difference too, when you are asked to sign with an institution, you see a lot of that language where someone will say, you know, Sarah Johnson is signing with this X institution. The big question there is, what are they signing? And that is the promise of what we call a national letter of intent. And the national letter of intent just isn't something that you sign because it's ceremonial. It's something that has embedded in that document is all of that liability that we talk about and what those rights are to that scholarship. And I'll let people in on these, they're not really secrets at all. They're something that I talk about every single day, but it feels like I'm letting people in on this huge secret every time I tell them. But you know, when you sign an NLI and you sign for your scholarship, which the other misnomer is that every scholarship is a full scholarship, and that's just not the case. Often that's a combination of athletic, academic, need-based aid. So those opportunities, that NLI is that contract, excuse me, start again. That NLI is actually that contract that if you, each year that you have that money, you are renewed at the Division I and the Division II level, you must be renewed by the coach. And this means that if you were to become injured as an NCAA athlete, that is not a reason for a coach to eliminate your scholarship. And so, for example, let's say that an athlete gets hurt their sophomore year and they have to redshirt. Eventually, if that athlete were never able to return, and perhaps their junior or even their senior year, they're not able to return, they would go in as a medical redshirt where they would still receive that money, but that money would be coming from a different pot. It wouldn't be coming from the team. It would be coming from a student athlete assistance fund. So it means that if there is an injury, that you're not just going to be up a creek. and you're not just going to be without your scholarship. That to me is a huge safety net for that too. It means that if a student comes in and a coach has said, man, I really think that you're going to be our star inside center, and that athlete is not excelling at that position, or that's the plan that the coach had didn't go according to how they wanted it to, that is not a reason either. If an athlete is performing below athletic expectation, that's not a reason to take it away either. And so says it your NLI. And if you were to render yourself ineligible, like quitting or saying, this just isn't for me anymore, and that's a reason. But it's a misnomer that coaches can take a scholarship specifically for an injury, because that is a very, very long process in order to be able to say, is that athlete rendered completely ineligible because of what's going on physically? But the real goal is to get the athlete back out on the field, right, while tending to a lot of the emotional stress and physical stress they're going through. And I think that you need to ask that question too. What's available for me if I were to get hurt? What kind of resources are there? And that's something you want to ask when you're on an official visit. You want to ask the other players, are there injured players? How are these players taken care of? And what's that standard of care? And what does that rehab look like? And just asking and being inquisitive in that way, kind of advocating for yourself. But that NLI sets it apart. It is a huge, huge safety net. And that is something, those 3 little letters mean something. It's not just because you want to go to signing day and that it's really exciting and you get your picture taken. If you're signing a housing agreement, or if you're signing a piece of paper that says that I'm attending someplace, but you haven't had an exchange of scholarship money, it doesn't say athletic grant in aid on it. You really need to ask those questions about what that means when I'm committing. It also means that if you're not signing an NLI and you decide to go to a school that doesn't involve an NLI, and then you choose to go someplace that does involve an NLI, you're not beholden to that school. The other way around is if you do sign an NLI with an NCAA school and then you decide not to, then you are beholden to that NLI. So it's really a safety net in both areas, but I don't think that there's anything really that could take its place as something that when you actually read those 3 pages that come to you, it's pretty exciting, number one, but it's also it's informative, and it shows you, these are and one of the things I see in NCAA athletics in other sports is athletes not knowing. You read these horror stories all the time about an athlete that went for freshman year and sophomore year, and then all of a sudden a coach told them that they weren't renewing their scholarship because they weren't good enough. Yeah, that's illegal. That's illegal. So I would ask people to caution, hearing those kind of stories and believing that is something that is characteristic of what's allowed in the NCAA. And if you know your rights, that's something. And if you know the coach, and if you trust in the coach, because you are building a relationship with that coach and with the program, I think that's imperative to understand too. And you said it earlier, it's kind of the broken leg test. Would I be happy if I never had rugby at this institution? And that's what you really have to ask yourself. And to the point you were making earlier, I couldn't have said it better myself on the divisional level. I think that rugby is at a cool stage right now that we're spread across all divisions. So the talent is really spreading across all of those divisions. And the growth is actually what we're going to see. People think it's at Division 1. It's not. The growth at Division 2 and Division 3, there are more schools at those divisions shopping for new opportunities. And I think that the expansion that is going to happen is going to be within the Division 2 and 3. I think Division 3 right now has the highest membership in NIRA as NCAA programs. And what I think people often get mixed up is because of the 1, the 2, and the 3, they see that as the hierarchy, and that's just not the case with rugby right now. It's just not. It's missional. It is a missional choice, and you're looking at this and saying, do I want a large institution with a very large campus, and do I want a high number of other students in my classes, and or do I want a smaller institution where I have get more attention, or maybe it's something that's uber focused in my major and that's why I want to go there. We get so focused on, it's fine to get drawn into a school because there's rugby there. That makes complete sense. But once you start doing your homework and you see that Division 1 is not for everybody, and I don't mean just talent wise at all. I just mean the atmosphere. I have seen athletes try to make the Division 1 experience stick when what they were really looking for is a Division III, and it becomes about the name, and
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes about well, who won a national championship, and who's doing the best with their record, and that part of it. If you're attending someplace because, and I can say this too because I won a national championship. If you're attending and looking at a school specifically and only because they're winners, what are you going to do when they go 1-6? What are you going to do when, suddenly they have a losing record? Do you love it as much? Are you going to, that's some really hard truths that people have to deal with, because if you're going there for a winning program, then it's ultimately, that's going to be what decides your happiness for those 4 years. And that's just not how that's supposed to work. You're putting a lot of stress on yourself, because then you become part of a program that you feel that you are the athlete class that comes in and has let that group down. And that is an enormous amount of anxiety that winning should just not be the biggest part of that equation. And I've had that. I mean, we came off of 3 national championships, and my whole recruiting class came in and they're like, what if we're the class that doesn't do this? And I was like, we need to love the process. We need to go back to loving the process, let go of the result. That's what we have to do. And it was a long road for us to have those conversations, to get rid of, athletes are already struggling with so much anxiety and depression before they even come into college, and then put them in the college realm and have them facing this, where they feel this pressure and they see trophies in their face every single day, and thinking that this is how they're defined. And I say this all the time: if you cannot feel that value without that national championship ring, it is going to be really hard for you to feel it with it. And that is the biggest thing. So one, I have a huge respect and shout out for our Division II and our Division III NIRA schools, because those are the coaches right now that are working with less and making a lot out of it. I mean, some of my best friends are Division II and Division III coaches in all sports, and I have the absolute utmost respect for the teams and the programs that they can mold and create out of what they have, at that level, and still be really, really successful. So I think that we're missing the boat. So many athletes will say, no one's giving me a look. I'm like, are you kidding me? There's a ton of schools out there right now that I can name that are looking for athletes. Right. So it's just being open to that and understanding it's not all about the name.
Right.
So
you're kind of leading me perfectly into like the second thing I was hoping we could touch on was just, so we kind of talked about a couple of things for parents, and for, hopefully if people, families are watching this together, and that's what I always advise, is like, we all want to be on the same page, like parents should be more, should understand what this process is, but obviously the students should be invested too, right? So again, it's not mom and dad being recruited or going through the process. It's students going through this. I mean, what are 1 or 2 things you think, or you wish students out there would know about anything, either the recruiting process or, playing college rugby? What are the things that are, you kind of mentioned, like maybe some surprises that they show up and they're like, oh, I didn't expect this. What are some of those things you think you've come across in your years at Quinnipiac?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I will tell you that I'm not sure what the image is that high school prospective student athletes have when they fill out the questionnaire and they imagine the coach on the other side of the computer taking a look at this. And I always ask, but I'm always curious, because I think that the image is that we've scanned this questionnaire with a fine-tooth comb and we're just not getting back, or if athletes only knew the amount of email that we get, and your phone is about 5 to 6 inches, and when it's gone from the top, it kind of disappears, right? So if you actually have that interest and you filled out a questionnaire and you haven't heard anything back, maybe you got a 1 line that says, thanks for filling this out. That's pretty standard and pretty custom. But I think, for us, if I were to take, and I do say this all the time, we would get, per semester, 100 applications or questionnaires in. And of those 100 questionnaires, you're probably going to see that 75 are going to get emails that say, hey, you fit the profile in this. And then out of that, 50 are going to get a phone call spread across the staff, depending upon where they are, in the recruiting process, because we're not going to call them if they're not of recruitable age. And then you're probably looking at 25 that are going to get second phone calls, conversations about transcripts, conversations about how they're progressing academically, like really kind of get into the meat of understanding more about what it is that they're looking for, and homesickness, current social scene, like all those things that we want to know about. And then, probably somewhere in between there is that 15 that you really getting, third, fourth calls to, and really developing those relationships. And then probably between, 6 to 8 of them are going to get official visits, maybe even more than that. But out of those, if you think about it, this year for us, we have 10 new athletes. So it's a pretty high percentage out of 10, but typically our classes are more like 6. So that's 6 out of 100 are making it through that process. And I'll tell you what, the 6 out of those 100 were not always the most talented that made it through, were the ones that got their information back to us. It were the ones that were engaged, the ones that were asking questions, the ones that continually said, hey coach, I'm going to be at this tournament. Hey coach, I was just in this art fair and I did this awesome thing. Check it out. And they send us photos, and like we develop relationships with those players. I have had players that have been wildly talented that send questionnaires in, and I'm like, wow, look, they run an amazing 40 and they can lift all this weight and they have all these stats, and then they never get into the eligibility center and we never go any further, because it's for us, it's we want to know, it's not necessarily that we even chase the best player. We chase the players that chase us almost. It's the 3 and the 4 that desire to become number 1 are the ones that really showcase themselves, and they're doing the work and they're making the effort. And once in a while you'll get a parent, email asking a question. They're like, I don't want to interfere, but I just have this question. We're like, no, that's okay, because your athlete's already taking a fair amount of interest in this, and we love that. But those that just desire to be in the process are the ones that stand out, and it didn't have that much to do with their stats. And people are shocked when they say, when you say that to them about how that process of elimination goes. But I also think that those are the athletes too, that if they're invested in that process early on, I want them to know how far that goes with college coaches. We get a ton of email. I don't think my office phone has had a ring for probably the last 4 years of a student athlete actually calling. I don't even know if my players know my office number. It's just always cell phone. It's changed quite a bit, but encouraging them, I can't tell you how much that would stand out if personally I got a call from an athlete that left me a voicemail. That kid's getting a call right back. And that's the way to make yourself really stand out. But I wish that athletes understood, what pool that they're in and had an understanding of that, which could maybe motivate them in a way to be more persistent per se. Even if I think a lot of them fill out these questionnaires, and if they don't get something back immediately, or if they don't get a full length letter, you know what, if you don't hear back from the coach after the questionnaire, send your game film. Send your game film anyway and say, hey coach, I just want to follow up on my questionnaire. I have had athletes where I have had their game film and I have not given it a second look. And then later on the kid calls and is like, hey coach, I know that, I sent game film and I didn't hear anything back, but I just wanted to have a chat with you. And I had a conversation with that athlete, and they were awesome. And I was like, let me take a look at that again. Let me go back and take a look at that again. And then, coach, they'll say, coach, that actually, that game that I sent through, it wasn't my best, but I really did, X, Y, and Z. And I really think I could add this to the program. And I'm like, you're amazing. Okay. It's really about that when when the athletes are also willing to be vulnerable. I don't want perfect. I'm so tired of perfect things coming through. I don't want perfect. And I know that that coaches like athletes now that make mistakes and are okay with making mistakes. And we don't expect that. And I won't speak for other coaches, but I know that is a challenge a lot of times, that people feel that their packet needs to be perfect and it needs to be full color and it needs to be so impressive. But really, it's coaches right now are yearning for that connection to understand more about that player beyond what they can read in their resume, beyond their volunteering, beyond all of that. I think that's something that's really, really difficult now for athletes.
Do you feel like, and this is just something I noticed a lot on the boys side, because obviously I work with a lot of young men. It's really interesting when you go to these maybe kind of like all-star team get-togethers or camps or things like that. Almost all of them are in the same positions from their home teams, right? They come together and all of a sudden you have like 10 scrum halves and 10 8-man.
Yeah.
It's like, because obviously they're in positions where they're getting the ball. And I've had this question a lot, is do you care a lot what position they're playing in high school, or is it most of the time, do you find that whatever they're playing in high school probably changes when they get to college? Do you know what I mean? Like, does it really is like, oh my gosh, well, I'm in this position and I'm not big enough to do that in college, and so a lot of them will talk themselves out of it because they're like, well, I'm
Right.
not that fast, or I'm not, whatever, and it's like, well, that may not actually be what you would be in college, so don't worry about it, and that
Yeah.
confidence factor there as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that's a great point. I think that less an athlete is married to one position coming out of college, even if you haven't played it, but you're open to it. And perhaps the coach takes a look and sees you from a little bit different perspective than maybe your high school coach does, and says, hey, this kid's at this position, but I really need a lock, and they might be great in this, and they've got the stature for it, and they have this. Being open to that part of it. I can't tell you how many athletes are married to the idea of being an inside center, or married to the idea of being an outside center. I am always saturated in backs, and we all, I love my forwards, and so much of that brunt work that you're doing inside that scrum, and you're doing inside around the base of contact, is just so important. And I think that because there tends to be a focus not on those stats when they come out of athletes can't tell me how many rucks they've blown up or how many times they've sealed one off. They can't tell that. And so therefore they feel like it has less value, but those are actually the things that we'll be looking for. Most of the time I look at defense more lately, even more so. It's been me looking at their defensive play and more so their body language of who's around them, and are they aware of the people around them, and how well are they working with those people. But the more flexible that an athlete can be, I think really, really does up those chances, because it really does make you a more well-rounded player anyway, just to know about, a variety of positions. But not being married, I can't tell you, I think one week I got all questionnaires, and there were probably 10 of them, and they were all inside centers. I'm like, how many inside centers do we have in this country? I didn't know we had that many. So, but yeah, I think that's a really fantastic point. And they all, I think it goes back to the same way that we sometimes see rugby marketed. And these are the athletes that are seeing this stuff on YouTube, when they see the scores and they see, I think that right now, this is something we talk about in NIRA, about our sports information, and how sports information is actually using those lenses. They show the athlete, and they're touching the ball down, and then they're touching the ball down. And it's like, well, who got them the ball, and how did that progress? And it's right. Like, that's the important stuff. That's the stuff that we want to see. And we're marketing it almost like we're watching football. And obviously rugby is not football. So I think that also puts it in their minds that if they're seeing all this on YouTube, and they're seeing the scores, and they're seeing this stuff, that those are the things that are important. But in reality, it's the opposite, and the coaches are looking at who got them the ball and how it was made, rather than who made it.
Okay, so I want to kind of wrap things up just a little bit. I'm curious your thought. You touched on this a little bit about, the growth of women's rugby, especially, on the NCAA side. I mean, overall, like if you could forecast a little bit, like, what do you think for those, little girls that are just starting to play rugby, now in like middle school or elementary school, like what would you maybe hope, or what do you think college women's rugby will look like in 5 years and 10 years? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm absolutely 100%. I'm going a decade out. Let's go a decade out.
Okay.
So that means that the kids right now who are playing little kid soccer, and that generation, right, like the 5 to 6 year olds. So now we're going to go a decade out. I believe we'll have achieved NCAA full championship status. It will look much like the NCAA women's soccer I think that with achieving those 40 teams, that opportunity that means that when that opportunity that's available now will have doubled, if not more. I think the visibility of women's rugby, given that within, what will be in a decade, we'll be in 2029, and I'll be old and I'll be trying to get into the stadium to go see that event, and they'll be like, you're not allowed. I'll be like, I swear I was somebody at some point. I let me in. No, I'm just kidding. But that's called progress, right? That's called progress. And I think that for the young women now, they're going to be watching on TV saying, oh, I was one of the first people. They're going to be in the same position that the women in the golden era of sports were in 1982, 10 years after Title IX was a thing. And they were the first to reap the benefits of the scholarships. And they still today talk about it and say, oh, I was one of the first to have a scholarship. I was one of the first to, actually have what the men had or close to it. I was the first to have a full-time coach, all those things. We're doing that now. And in that decade, the athletes now are going to be able to say that. And I think it's incredible. And I don't think that, there's so few sports now that have to still go through this process, that they don't have an appreciation for where we are right now. And I get like super amped about it. But I think that decade out is going to be where you're going to see it. And with the Olympics and with the explosion of sevens and all of that, and, our Nia Tappers and our, Mars and there's just going to be that level of recognition that exploded the same way that prior to, the mid 90s, where people just weren't aware that USA soccer women's teams, like Brandi Chastain and Mia Hamm, like, you just didn't know who Michelle Akers was. And then all of a sudden you did. I think that's coming for us. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the development on the NCAA side, where you're going to see more athletes in women's jerseys and younger kids understanding what that participation is like and what that means to the growth of it for our sport. I think it's incredible. So I'm obviously the biggest cheerleader ever.
Yeah, no, I swear to God, when you're like 10 years and then this is what's, I literally got goosebumps. I was like,
yeah,
yay!
yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really can't, thank you enough, really, for your wisdom and your insight into this process. I hope we can do this again.
Absolutely.
And I will definitely, keep spreading the word, keep doing the good work. And I can't wait. I will be with you in that stadium in 10 years. So
you'll have to get me in.
All right. Well, have a good day.
Thanks so much,
We'll
Karen.
talk soon.